We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kimberly White. I am a proud PLNU alumna. I am a graduate of the journalism program, and so it is my great honor to be here today. I currently work in the Office of Alumni Relations, and we've been hosting these really fun Loma talks throughout the summer. We've covered some great topics and heard from amazing alums, and today is no different. Today we're hearing from Danielle Cervantes Stephens and Abby Hamblin, and they're amazing journalists, wonderful women. Danielle is a current PLNU faculty member, and she taught one of my favorite classes, and very excited to hear from her. Abby and I are from the same graduate year, and we worked on the student newspaper, The Point, together. We interned at the San Diego Union-Tribune covering Comic-Con, which was one of my favorite college journalism experiences. So I'm just very honored and excited to be with them today. Thank you all for joining us. I think that this is going to be a really timely and important conversation. So get ready. Danielle has an awesome PowerPoint for us today. We are going to be diving into lots of different topics. If you'd like to get out a pen and some paper, be ready to take some notes. We are going to be doing a question and answer portion of the presentation. You'll see that there is a chat box at the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to type in your questions throughout the presentation. We might get to some of them throughout the talk, but we'll be sure to absolutely answer your questions at the end as well. So without further ado, I would like to invite Danielle and Abby to just introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you are up to, and then let us know what we can expect from today's talk.
Abby, do you want to go ahead first and then introduce yourself?
Yeah, so as Kim said, my name's Abby Hamblin. I work for the San Diego Union-Tribune, not too far actually from PLNU. When we did work in the office, unfortunately we're all working from home right now, but that's the case for many people. My job is technically editor and producer for the Union-Tribune. I specifically work with the opinion section on most projects. I'm also an editorial board member for the Union-Tribune, and that is a whole other conversation that we can definitely have along the way if we want. I worked on the newspaper at PLNU for, I think, the entire time I was there, or most of it, which I loved. The office is amazing there with an ocean view, of course, we love that. And then I've also worked as a city government reporter. I've worked in social media. My journalism career has taken me to Central California. So hello to anyone who's out there, but now I'm back in San Diego. I'm very happy to be working for the Union-Tribune.
Right on. My name is, sorry, I have a delay. It's driving me crazy. My name is Danielle Cervantes Stephens, and I teach at Point Loma. I teach in journalism. I am a PLNU alumna from 2000, and I actually studied literature, political science, and learned journalism on the job. And I had this very great but random experience of getting a job at the newspaper when I was a sophomore in college. And I didn't expect to go into journalism, it happened. It was a great opportunity at that time, and I just worked hard. I turned it from an internship into a full-time job. And hold on, my audio is just still driving me crazy. Sorry about that. So when I was at the newspaper, I was part of a team that revealed some pretty egregious information about a Congress member who was indicted. And then in between 2006 and 2009, I worked on a couple of big investigative projects at the Union-Tribune that looked at basically mismanagement of city resources. And I've taken these skills, I've taken this experience, and I've tried to share it with my students at Point Loma. I think I buried a lead, as we say in journalism, which is that, no, I didn't. I said that I was a grad from 2000. So as we sometimes do in the media, we work really late and operate off of not the most sleep. So, yeah, so we're coming together because this is, Kim, did you want to advance the slide? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so this tells you a little bit more about us as well. Abby, did you talk about Hello Gen Z? That's her new project. It's a podcast that has launched and is really amazing.
Thank you.
So you might hear a little bit more about that. But you can kind of see from like our little graphic here that what we've been up to and what we're going to cover today. Obviously it's a moment for us, right? We have a pandemic where we are trying to understand all the information that's being sent to us and being published and produced. We have racial inequality and injustice that is causing parts of our country to pretty much everywhere flare up like nothing we've seen in a very, very long time. And on top of that, we have the elections coming. So, and we hope that none of those three things gets, the short end of the stick. Like, we want to make sure that we're juggling all those things and want to learn how we do that. So we're going to give you a little background on what journalism is, particularly so that you can know what journalism is compared to other practices, other types of writing, other types of research, other types of publication. We're going to tell you about what best practices should be for us as the media, what the expectation is for us to do our jobs well, ethically, and provide the public with truthful and vetted information, accurate information. Abby's going to talk a little bit about the current climate and challenges. There's been a lot of change, and she's going to make a point about how our trust in media has evolved and what that means for us in 2020. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about this being a two-way street between the media and the public. It's you could call it a contract, you could call it a covenant, but the only way we can do our job is with an engaged audience. Otherwise, we just report in a black hole and we don't get anything done. We need readers, we need people and an audience, viewers, to take what we've worked on, what we've done, process it, think about it, and maybe take it to action. So that action about what that covenant is and the two-way street is, Abby's going to talk a little bit about, like, what are your best practices? So how do you engage in this democratic contract and do your job as we try to do ours? Kim is going to talk a little bit about good media fitness and hygiene. So how do you stay sane? How do you stay healthy during such a crazy time? And with these three major issues streaming constantly with news, and how do you survive that when you're trying to survive what's going on? And also, we'll just gonna talk a second about faith and practice. What's the relationship between journalism and how we walk our faith? And we're just going to explore that a little bit and talk about how it might be surprising that the goals of the media are actually very much they're very ethical. They're very actually Christian in some of their ways, and so we're gonna explore that. And then, of course, we're gonna take time to answer any questions you have. And if you like, you can go ahead and send Kim a question now, and she will curate them for us and lead us later in questions. Woo, little graphic. So just like a little bit of journalism 101, just maybe like a few minutes here to talk about what you would learn in a intro to journalism class. That's most important, like for in terms of your civics, because obviously we're not trying to teach you a trade, but teach literacy. So the big thing for me anyway, as an investigative reporter and data editor, is that I really respect my role as, or our role of the media as the fourth estate. What does that mean? Oh, estate. It's like, oh, is it a mansion? It actually comes from France, like a lot of good things do. No, just kidding. But the idea of an estate is basically a branch, like a branch of government. So we actually, we operate with this idea that we have our checks and balance between the executive branch, the legislative branch, Congress, and the Supreme Court. But there's this fourth branch, which basically we, as particularly those of us who are watchdog journalists, where we believe that the press has a hand in keeping those other branches honest, or at least trying to reveal things that maybe the other branches aren't seeing, or yeah. So like, for instance, in the illustration, we the people, part of our First Amendment right, including practicing our own religion, is freedom of the press. And what that means is that it doesn't mean that we can just publish. Okay, it's not enough that, okay, yeah, you're allowed to publish a magazine, a newspaper, a TV broadcast. No, what the right is that's given is that we are allowed to do that without punishment and without censorship and without fear. So for a lot of us right now, that's a very sticky situation, because there is a lot of fear. And we, not just censorship, but anything you write right now can be weaponized, basically. So so we want to take our responsibility really seriously. Some people might say, well, you think really highly of yourself. Like, wow, you think you're part of, democratic process. The thing is that for the last 200 plus years in United States history, we don't know what it looks like without media. And there's no way to really try it. We see little bits there here and there of censorship, but this is one of the reasons why we have a very robust debate about how much we should charge, if all, for publishing news, because we do provide this role that is very, very, very complicated and complex and expensive. And basically we do it because we want the truth to come out. We want to seek truth. And sometimes we are doing this at our own, on our own pretty much. But so we the people, so First Amendment right, part of a pillar of democracy. The media does several things. Sorry, I didn't mean to attack you with my hands. I'll sit on them now. But we don't just reveal, we don't just not every story is Watergate. A lot of what we do is information, telling people when there's going to be a city council meeting, when there's going to be a Padres game. We entertain people. We give them games. We give them comic strips. We engage them. We give them editorials. We advocate. We do so much more than just get in your face and act mean and say that you're doing something wrong. And all of those facets are what make us, or how we try to function in your lives, is providing those different elements: informing, revealing, entertaining. What we do real quick is Abby will talk a little bit about the differences, but what I like to think of is that in the United States, journalists, if they're going to work in broadcast or newspapers or radio, for the most part, you have to be, in 2020, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree. And that means that we require a certain field of study, a certain discipline. We don't have a certification, but there are best practices that we follow. There are skills that are very, very sensitive and can be dangerous in the wrong hands that we entrust journalists to do. Journalists are actually, a lot of folks don't know this, but our access is very similar to public safety and to investigators, insurance claim investigators. So we have access to records and to certain documents that or records that only like the police would have, or like I said, like insurance companies or healthcare companies. So, and we're given that access because the government or our system, our democracy realizes that that we do have practices that keep us in check. And later I'll reveal a couple of sources that you can go to learn more about what our ethics are, like what our oath is, basically. And you wouldn't expect a nurse to show up after 4 years on bedside or show up at a patient's bedside without 4 years of training and internships. We do the same. Most programs require internships, and any news organization of any metal is going to require some pretty decent experience before they send a reporter into a delicate or sensitive story or investigation. So we do go through a process that is very different than other disciplines, and it is actually very and my students might agree because they went through this with me, but there is a lot you have to learn, and a lot of practices that you have to really know well so you don't make mistakes. All right, I've already talked too much, but some of these best practices that I mentioned are, or that I'd like to mention real quick, is, for instance, we have we do have an oath. So we say, for instance, that we will not misidentify ourselves when we talk to sources. We say that we are going to get the information right. We are supposed to get both sides of the story. And that's harder sometimes. And we also are trying to, we want to be accurate. We don't want to publish or broadcast errors. And so we have ways of correcting those errors, jumping on them and editing ourselves and vetting our work. I call it bulletproofing. And the best practices that I learned were on the job at the Union-Tribune. And my editors put the fear of God in me about making mistakes. So those best practices are the practices that I then transfer to my students or give to my students, and that I think that they have in them that will keep them on the up and up and really trying to do their best as they're reporting on really difficult issues. Little animation. It's coming at me. So Abby, do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, so I thought that was great, Danielle. I think that one of the things about working about a newspaper that I always wish I could say is I wish that people could sit in our meetings and sit in our, newsroom and see how things are actually done, because I think there's sometimes an assumption or maybe some sort of opinion that there's an agenda there, or people, they may have thoughts about how we do things, but I just think that if we could show this more often, and these sorts of conversations are great, and I'm really grateful to Kim for, putting this together, because it used to be, that with newspapers, you would put the paper together, you would drop it off on someone's doorstep, and that would be the end of it. And a lot of people subscribed to the newspaper, and there were decision makers in the newsroom who would decide what would go into the paper and what the news of the day is. But now the amount of news sources has gone through the roof. And actually, as a matter of fact, newspapers are shrinking. The number of local journalists is lower than ever. And so I think that the accountability is coming more and more, both on newsrooms and journalists, to explain how and why and be accountable for the work that they do, but also for news consumers to do a little bit more work on their end, because there are so many places to get news and there are so many places to get information. And I wish that it was the case that all news outlets were created equal, that they were all of the same, sort of mission. And I think what we're going to teach you today is how to sort of differentiate what are the trustworthy sources and how you should go about looking at news, because there's just social media is a place to get news, and actually social media plays a big role in the news that you see versus the news that you maybe should see or don't always see. And then you've got, podcasts, you've got all different kinds of ways to consume media than just reading it. And there's also a conversation to be had between national news and local news. And Danielle and I have worked for the San Diego Union-Tribune, so we'll, always say that local news is the best and very important. But I was reading a stat recently that said that people are more likely to say they know what's going on in the nation than they are in their own communities. And so I think that's one of the things that, journalists would really advocate for, knowing what's going on in your backyard, is because we are doing the work day in and day out that you can hold us accountable for, because we are your neighbors. Our kids are in the same schools as yours. I think we want our communities to thrive just like we want readers to thrive, or readers want their communities to thrive. So the state of news media right now, and I sometimes hesitate to even use the word media, because that really refers to, all these things that may not even have anything to do with journalists. But again, there are so many sources right now, and there's a major difference between, say, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and the San Diego Union-Tribune, the Dallas Morning News, your local newspaper. And I think more than ever, the responsibility is, like I said, getting on consumers to sort of wade through all of that, especially because you're going to see on social media, and there's stories about this all the time lately, you could definitely go read up on this, that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they have algorithms that help determine what you see. And so say you are very interested in what's going on with climate change, and so you are looking at a lot of you follow a lot of accounts about climate change, or maybe you've clicked on an article via Instagram that was about climate change. Well, you're going to see more and more and more of that, and you may have no control through your explore area or through your Facebook feed of where that's coming from. And so there's a lot of work to do to sort of discern, and I think we're going to talk about that coming up. But there's just a lot, as Danielle discussed, that partnership between the community and the journalists, that's more important than ever, I think. And what I'll tell you about the Union-Tribune is we have our email addresses on the website, and you can write letters to the editor. And we have a policy on our news outlet explaining how we do things. If you go to our website, you can see how we decide who our sources should be, how we determine what we cover, what the difference is between news and opinion, and also who our leadership is. So if you have a problem with us, I don't know if you can call CNN and get someone on the line who can really fully, chime in with what your concern is. But I mean, I'm on Twitter, you can come and yell at me, and people do all the time, trust me. And I think anyone in the newsroom would tell you the same. But I think that's kind of the difference. When you look at all this there's blogs, there's, you know, you see more and more on Instagram, people are reposting things that they find on Instagram, and that's their news and their way of getting information. But there's just more work than ever that has to be done to differentiate between these many sources. And I think it's a good thing to have a variety of news. I would call it a news diet. So for instance, I look at newsletters in the morning who sort of aggregate and put stories in front of me that they think I should read, but there's someone there who's writing that news letter, you know, so that's someone's opinion of what I should read that day. I look at Twitter, but I also have a wide range of accounts that I follow, and if you only follow certain ones, you're only going to see certain ones. So I think, and especially since 2016 with the rise of fake news, which is a very difficult conversation to have as well, there really is a lot of information out there that's not fully sourced or vetted or substantiated. And so I think diversifying your news diet is really good. And if you're someone who only watches one channel all the time or only reads, you know, one blog all the time, you're not going to get the full picture of all the information that's out there. Would you agree, Danielle?
Absolutely. And Kim is going to do a little bit more too about like what you said, like balancing your media diet. And but this, you know, it's interesting. I was thinking because it had been a while, I'll be honest, since I was able to subscribe to our local newspaper and get it delivered. And I thought, when I read it the next day, is it going to have fresh information? And it did. And it showed me again about how to consume media outside of just like the little listicles you get in the email, or I mean, a lot of times information or news is presented as like a list within a list within a list. Like, so first of all, the article is a listicle, but then there's another list at the top that basically tells you what you're going to read. And so all of that curation is basically molding how you are consuming and interpreting media. And what I liked about, not that this is a plug about local newspapers, but what I like is that it's a cafeteria. I see a range of things that are offered to me, and I get to choose. I get to see everything on the menu, every major news story, and I get to choose what is right for me, not an algorithm. So the other thing I kind of epiphany I had is, I don't think it's a coincidence that the opinion section, commentary, advocacy is in the local section. I think there's a reason there, because that goes to this social contract, is that it's through the opinion section that you engage your public, you get them, you know, riled up, you inspire them to change or to make changes or to call their representatives or bring their issues to church, whatever. But that window is through local news, because that's where we actually at the grassroots level are most of us are participating in civic government and in what we're reading.
And I would also add that,
interestingly, this is totally unrelated, but I just read a statistic yesterday from Poynter Institute, which studies journalism, and they said that for once, again, a nightly newscast is the most watched TV show in the United States right now, above any reality TV, above any show. I mean, I know that production's down, but that was really fascinating to me. And it was ABC, by the way, nightly news. So it just, I think, underlines the importance of news. And when we saw in that previous slide, you know, when we were planning this, Abby just had this awesome point about the folks that we used to entrust to deliver our news, and we didn't question them because they were so good. I mean, they set the bar for best practices. Not only did they fight censorship and were they groundbreakers, but they took their role so seriously that the public accepted that, you know, it entered into that covenant of trust with them. And in 2020, it's a very different landscape, and it's not impossible. I was able to build my brand locally by not making any mistakes. So, and that's one thing I always instill in my watch pups, my students, which is that when you start making mistakes, people are not going to listen to you anymore. And so that's the contract I have with my audience is I'm going to do everything in my power not to make any mistakes so that we can keep that two-way street of trust. And I expect if I make a mistake, we need the public to say, have you considered this, or how did you come to that analysis? Like, and it's difficult and it's awkward sometimes and uncomfortable, but it's the only way that we're kept honest sometimes. It's watching the watchdog.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think that journalists more than ever are aware that they need to step up and be more transparent about how they do things too. I know a lot of people in my newsroom will say that. It used to be that you didn't really know who reported your news unless you were watching TV. You know, you get the newspaper on your lap, but you wouldn't know who was reporting it or why they made the decisions. And I think that a lot of time passed where we didn't do enough to explain ourselves and describe how and why we do things. And I think we're trying to catch up now and do some of that. And there is a lot of distrust in the news, and it's really unfortunate, but I think these conversations are important to sort of help try and build that back and do a good job. I always say, like, if you could see the reporter sitting in the room with stacks this high of documents trying to find out how your politician is harming your community, it would really click. You know, I sit next to those people all the time, but not everyone else gets to see how passionate and how hard we're trying to hold people accountable. And I think the more we can do that, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. What's our, yes. So this is you, Kim.
Awesome. Yeah, I love just hearing more about who curates our news and how we can become, you know, part of that covenant. So yeah, what I've been on a journey of learning as a journalism student and now just as a working professional and as a participant in society is how incredibly important it is just to learn how to become a good media consumer. As Abby spoke about earlier, you know, we are in an age where news is coming at us from all angles. It's not just, you know, picking up a newspaper in the morning anymore. We're seeing it on television and on social media and on billboards and just everywhere around us. So it's important to learn how to become a good media consumer. And so we just wanted to now talk a little bit, and Abby and Danielle, I'd love to hear your thoughts on just what are some best practices that individuals can put into their lives to become better consumers and to better relate to the news in our daily lives. And so these are just a few thoughts and examples of, we just need to learn how to recognize our own biases. There's bias in different outlets, but we also hold biases, you know, internally. And so it's important to recognize what we know and what we believe, and also what we don't yet know. That we're all on a learning journey. This is why most of us chose to go to a liberal arts college to become critical thinkers. And so we need to keep that critical thinking brain on, not just when we're in college, not just in the workplace, but in our everyday lives. Learn how to become a critical thinker and recognize your own biases. And I'd love to hear Abby and Danielle talk more about this, but because they're the ones that are on the ground looking for sources, but even as consumers, we need to learn how to vet our sources. We need to learn how to read past the headline and know, okay, who is sharing this? You know, what are the facts? where is this data coming from? Who conducted that study? Is this person actually an expert, or are they just sounding like an expert? So it's really important to learn how to vet our own sources. Danielle made this great point of make sure you come back after commercial breaks. Like, don't just listen for the teaser. We need to understand the full story. It's important to be skeptical and curious, and know that there's always multiple sides to a story. That we're, just because you read one story that happens to be on the front page of your local newspaper, it doesn't mean that there's another side of the story that's also being told deeper inside the newspaper. For example, I was reading about our social justice movements and some of the protests in our nation, and reading a lot of headlines about how all of these protests are turning into riots and it's becoming really violent. And I was like, oh, that's hard. Like, is that the only side of the story though? And then I do a little bit of Googling and I look a little bit deeper, and oh wow, there's also really amazing things that are happening on our streets, and there's other sides to this story. So it's important, even if we just don't see the story in our news feed, in that listicle, in that email that you get every day, doesn't mean that outlets are not covering different sides of the story. It just means that you might have to go look for it yourself and do a little bit of digging. It's really important to ask questions and follow the money and know who owns the newspaper and who controls that social media account that you're following. Know, who's backing that and curating that voice. And then know what you're reposting, know what you're forwarding. Yeah, what do you think, Danielle?
I was just going to say, could you hit enter a couple times to my blasted animations?
Yeah, this is really important. Do you want to? Okay.
Yeah. So I think Kim covered everything. What else might I add?
I think I was going to add here that if you look at a news outlet, whether it's on TV or on a podcast or otherwise, I think a good way to tell where they're coming from is whether they do updates and corrections. The Union-Tribune, for example, prints corrections as much as it makes us cringe to have gotten something wrong. Accountability is important. If they come back to the story a second time and explain more that's been released, I think that's a good sign of a good news outlet. Someone who's been covering, something that we do in our news outlet is try and show the previous reporting we've done on a subject. And if you can see that an outlet has consistently covered something, they're gonna have some expertise there that maybe a blog or a random Instagram person hasn't had. That's another good sign. And then just little things like looking at the date, this could be a story from 2018. And if you take that extra 2 seconds to look, that'll give you the context that you need. Ask questions like we're going to see on the next slide about where this is coming from and who's behind it. And I think just seeing if there's any context to what you're reading, if it's just a headline, or it's just like a quick blog with 2 paragraphs, that's not someone who knows a lot about the subject. So as much as we don't want to read giant long pieces of content, I think just doing that little extra work to see where this news outlet's coming from. And even when they cite people, go check those sources out. And if you trust who they cited, you'll know that's a news outlet that you feel comfortable returning to. So I wish that we could just trust all these news outlets. I really wish it would make information and democracy a lot safer and easier, but it's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Good thoughts. Abby, could you walk us through this graphic real quick? Tell us what are some best practices of just fact checking? Yeah,
so I really like this graphic. I just shared it on my Instagram last night, actually, because I've been seeing so much flying across my Instagram that is just so, there's no context to a lot of these things. So I think this is a great, the museum, which has since closed down, unfortunately, has offered a lot of educational resources, and this is for escaping fake news, escaping questionable sources. So, this first one, do the facts hold up? I think that's a great question. Like, someone may post 100,000 people did this. Where did they get that? You know, did they get it from a legitimate source or did they not? And if they can't prove it, if they say it with no citation, that's questionable. You know, little things like on the next one, who's the source? Is it an aggregator? And who is it? Like, who's the human being who sat down and did that? You don't always know, but to know that someone put something together is a great thing to think about. And I think what you'll see on a lot of blogs is they don't have a byline. You know, it'll just say like such and such america.com, and there's no human being taking responsibility, which that is the hardest thing in the world as a journalist, I think, is to put your byline and stand by what you've reported. And I think that's important because it puts some accountability into this process. So, you know, check who it is. If it's someone on social media, who is that person? I keep seeing people share stuff from like Patriot99 on Instagram, and it's like, who is that? I would never reshare something from someone I didn't know, even if the facts seem true and even if the concept seemed, you know, with good intentions. What's the big picture? I think that you know, considering all the sources I heard you say earlier, you know, like there's two sides to every story. Often there's three sides or four. And so checking to see if the news outlet includes more than just one perspective is very important. A recent example we've had at the Union-Tribune is the subject of affirmative action. And there are many, many, many different you know, stakeholders in that process, the universities, the students' parents, international students, you know, local communities. And so if the news outlet is giving all that context, that's going to be a good news outlet to go to instead of just, you know, one side. I think the next one, audience, is a really interesting one because I think you're going to see that certain things are presented in a way that clicks with certain types of people. You really want to find something that's super neutral looking, I think, in its presentation. For instance, some things are super presented for kids or youth, or some things are super, I don't know, just like on Instagram especially, you'll see these things going viral that are sort of shaped for a certain person of a certain perspective, and you don't want anything that already shows you, you know, a lot about who's behind it or what the agenda is. And then why was it made? You know, is there a call to action at the end of it? That's maybe a question of this isn't factual or this isn't specifically about the facts. It's to try and get you to think something at the end. You know, I think most news isn't going to have that you should be reading. And then I think just the execution, grammar, tone. I can't tell you guys how many hours I've spent in newsrooms talking about which word conveys the information better than another. We used to do that in the Point Weekly. You know, we have a style guide that determines which words we use and how. We care very, very much about language and precision of what we're presenting. So if you're seeing a source that kind of just uses bad grammar and kind of willy-nilly says what they're trying to say, that's a good sign that it's maybe not a trustworthy source because, and even the tone, you know, is it sarcastic? Really ask those questions about, you know, is it authoritative? Is it giving voice? Is it putting a spotlight on other voices than just the person who's posting it? I think those are all things you could really think about. And I know it's hard. You just want to read the news quickly and spend 5 minutes and go about your day. But this is the stage that we're in now. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of options for where you get your news. So you have to do a little bit of work. And I hope these steps aren't too daunting, but it's good advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that the idea is food for thought, right? So that's all we're trying to do is give some ways, some tools, and some things to think about.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk for a minute about why this is important. Why is it even important to be a good consumer of media? And then we want to finish up and leave a little bit of time for questions as well. Danielle, you alluded to, we wanted to talk about why is this important as a Christian? Seeking truth, making sure that we get the story correct. Why is that important for Christians, would you say? Oh, you're muted at the moment.
Go ahead and advance one more slide.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
So this is a bit about fitness and hygiene, right? Like why is it important, and what are some good steps to be a good media consumer?
covered a lot of this, and I just want to like reiterate because you know, I was thinking of that little icon with the weight training, and I thought, like, how do you like illustrate to try to keep your news balance? It'd be like if you were training to be a weightlifter, and on one side you had 100 pounds and the other you had like 75 or 50. And if you don't keep that balanced, you're not going to become like a well-rounded, you know, your muscles are going to be all like weird and funky in places and uneven. And so or like with, you know, what we eat, like a very well-balanced plate of food. You know, you get some entertainment news. I'll be the first to say I love myself some BuzzFeed. I love BuzzFeed, but I love my local news. I love Architectural Digest. And so there's all kinds of things that we read, and we want to keep that balance to keep ourselves sane and healthy. And we also want to stay calm during this really, really difficult time. We want to keep when we hear about data and figures, we want to keep that in perspective. We want to realize, particularly about what's going on right now, that this is all a learning curve for all of us. So sometimes I think we're reacting so fast that we're not even able to pause yet and figure out what's going on, what we're doing. And so we're learning as we go along with this as well, but we're still trying to maintain the highest level of journalism we can, that we were trained to do. So that's what I'd leave you about that slide. So we could talk a little bit about our faith.
Abby, would you have anything to add about fitness and hygiene?
I think I've already said it, but just diversifying the places where you get your news. I'm a big podcast fan. You know, I think thinking critically, as we've said, is very important. I think taking breaks from the news is important, but I think that gives you all the more reason to pick safely and thoughtfully where you get your news. If you're only going to get a little bit, make sure you're getting it from the right places. And yeah, I think that just thinking about where you're coming from as you go into the news, and thinking about, you know, if you go looking for something that you already believe, you're going to find it. There's always a news outlet. There's always somebody funding a study. There's always going to be people on social media talking about the same things you already believe. But if you want new facts that are new to you, information, investigations, and putting a spotlight on things you don't know about, you have to do some work to go find it. And so I would just add that, you know, it's hard work, but it's worthwhile.
Absolutely. So faith and practice, why do we do this?
I'm going to pass this one to Danielle first.
Well, here's the deal. We are in community with other people, and we are part of a body of Christ. And everything we do impacts other people. And if we take that responsibility honestly and authentically, and we apply it to as many aspects of our lives as we can, and we apply it to our jobs as journalists, but also our jobs as media consumers, there are some things that we want to pay attention to. The first thing is that dis and misinformation hurts people. And so before you or a media consumer like makes a big decision or forward something maybe inflammatory, or if you haven't done any of that work, you're like, oh, this looks like a good news source, let me send it. My husband the other day told me, you know, read this headline and it sounded so amazing, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, but so where was the source? That's just what I do. And he was like, oh, it's from News and Guts. And I was like, what? What's News and Guts? So he meant well, but you learn to ask, what's the source of that? Also, you know, if we are going to stand up for things that we believe in, whether you are fiscally conservative or you are pro-life or you are an environmentalist, The only way that you can be prepared is if you inform yourself. And the better you are informed, the more effective you're going to be. If you want people to listen to you, if you want to make change, become a responsible voter and consumer, and a responsible employee and employer, your decisions affect other people. I always think of the news media being almost like in this role of like the judges from the Old Testament, like doing something wrong. We can be very judgy, right? I mean, it's kind of like our job, and to root these things out as watchdogs. But that process of holding power accountable demands for fiscal accountability, for good stewardship, just like we require that and ask that of our churches, our communities. Those are things that are rooted in a Judeo-Christian ethic. And we cannot separate that from how we participate in the world. And I'd also say that look for the good news and the hope. Our Lord Jesus Christ is working in the world all the time, every day, every minute of forever. And if we reach out to the people that we want to learn about, we want to hear, and we want to be heard, that's the good news. And if we read some good news in the newspaper that underlines that hope, then praise be.
I would also add that, if we're, to Danielle's point about community, if we're called to love others and love our neighbors and love one another, we have to know each other. And I think the opinion section, especially of the Union-Tribune, lately I've been learning so much from it because it's first-person essays. And I think that hearing other people's stories and hearing what they've been through is a way to get to know and love them and connect in community. The division is not reflective of who we are as, Christians who want to love and support one another and take care of the least of these. And so I think that being informed and knowing who our community is and not siloing off is kind of what we're called to do anyway. And so being informed is empowering in that way. And that's something that, inspires me to continue as a journalist. And I hope that, being an empowered citizen is something that also helps us as Christians.
Well said, absolutely. Thank you. I've learned so much today. I don't know about the rest of you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are just at about time. There's a couple more slides. I want to make sure that you get some of these resources. But if you have a question, please go ahead and put that into the chat box right now. Hopefully we've answered several of your questions throughout the presentation. Abby, this is a fun one. Tess asked what we think about podcasts and how do podcasts contribute to accurate news. And I think that you just spoke to that a bit in even just the opinion section, but what about podcasts?
Yeah, I think, again, look at who the producer of the podcast is, look at who's funding it, look at where it comes from. I think there are certain podcasts that are meant to provoke dialogue and questioning of certain issues, which is a good thing, I think. I think it's a great medium. Especially an example in that community sort of covenant, I think you called it, Danielle. Something that we do at the Union-Tribune is provide the audio of candidate interviews. And there's a very big difference between reading what a candidate says and reading their mailer that you got in the mail and hearing them be questioned by an informed individual who is pushing them to share their policy or their opinion. And so I think that audio really offers kind of like a personal connection that you can get that you maybe wouldn't get in words. And I'm totally supportive of podcasts. I have 2 at the Union-Tribune. We interview interesting San Diegans on Name Drop San Diego. And then on Hello Gen Z, we're looking at what the youngest generation is bringing to the American identity and culture. And it's really meant to start a conversation and provoke thought. They have very, very different views than previous generations. And, while you may disagree with them or you may disagree with what you hear on podcasts, I think thought-provoking podcasts are a good thing. But again, ask all those same questions we said of other news outlets.
That's good. Danielle, do you want to speak to any of these sources? These are just up on the side, some ways that we can learn more. And
yeah, I mean, they're pretty self-explanatory. What I might point out is we've got the Museum Ed, which is, the museum is still alive virtually, though not physically, as Abby said. But they have a whole little mini curriculum or large curriculum on media literacy. Pointer Institute as well has fun interactives, even some games and puzzles if you want to like share that with like your kids, if you need any homeschool civics activities. I recommend those. We've included the links for the Office of Alumni, or just wanted to thank them. Thank the Department of Literature, Journalism, Modern Languages, and a shout out for Hello Z. I needed to, I forgot to put the link in, Abby, for your other podcast so
That's okay.
share that. But, and also I just wanted to shout out my pastor from middle school and high school tuned in. Hi, Pastor Ireland, and hi, Carolyn. That's really sweet. They were the ones who encouraged me to come to Point Loma. If that just tells you about the full circle. So, and I believe that Dr. Ireland is that he is an alum of Pasadena.
Yes,
yeah.
He is. What a neat legacy and an awesome community that we get to be a part of. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. Up on this next slide are contact information. If you want to get in touch with Danielle and Abby, they are very generously willing to chat and take this offline. This is an important conversation to keep having. So please, continue to engage. Thank you for tuning in to Loma Talks. Next week, we have another amazing talk up with two alums, Brian Frey and John Runyon, and they're going to be sharing about their church in Arizona and how they create spaces for multicultural communities over coffee and church. So that's going to be a fun conversation as well. This recording of today's webinar is also going to be up on YouTube. So if you want to go back to those slides and look at those resources again, please do. But Danielle and Abby, thank you so much for your time today. This was really fun.
Thank you.
Bye.
Awesome.